Voters, or anyone with a mortgage, could be in the brace position for more interest rate hikes after the words of Phil Lowe yesterday and off the back of increased inflation. Joining me live is Greens leader Adam Bandt for more on this. Thanks very much for your time. The Greens have actually been saying, look, no more rate hikes, even with the ones we've had, a surge in inflation last month. The argument from economists is without these hikes, we'd have even higher inflation and a huge problem for the economy.
Well, our concern is that by just leaving all the heavy lifting to the Reserve Bank, Labor and the RBA are using everyday people as cannon fodder in the war on inflation. If it's all left up to the Reserve Bank, they've only got one tool, and we're worried that they're going to not only cause more pain for people, but push the country towards recession if rates keep going up. There's an alternative approach, which involves the government getting its hands on the levers, saying we're going to freeze rents, stop mortgages going up, and instead look at the huge profits that the supermarkets, the banks, the big gas corporations are making, start making them pay their fair share of tax and use that to deliver real cost of living relief to people. That's how you tackle inflation without hurting everyday people. But if Labor just washes its hands, leaves it all up to the Reserve Bank, more people are going to suffer more pain.
So just thinking about how that works in a sort of macroeconomic sense. So the government would freeze rent. It would, get more money from multinationals and supermarkets. So it wouldn't change prices there. You're not saying that, but it would tax them more.
Well, it would certainly change rental prices, and the RBA,
the
RBA governor has made it clear that rising rents.
You're not setting supermarket prices, but you're taxing companies more, getting more revenue and handing it out. So that's inflationary. You're giving a whole lot more money to people at an inflationary time.
Well, we're stopping prices going up, so that means less money being spent on essentials.
But why would it?
But it means
stop
more
rent
money
going up. But what else would it stop?
But it means more money. For example, if you could put dental into Medicare, for example, that means that people at the moment who are putting off essentials, things like going to the dentist because they can't afford it, which ends up with people ending up with higher health costs down the line and a greater burden not only on them but on the public system. Put dental into Medicare, then people can afford to have a bit more money in their own pockets to meet essentials and do things like go to the dentist.
But the big drivers such as food, clothing, holidays, people have more money to spend on them. That would be inflationary on those items.
But this comes to the other point, because implicit in what you and Labor and RBA are saying in that is, well, the situation that we have at the moment, where people are having to choose between eating or paying the rent because they can't afford to do both. People are skipping things like going to the dentist or going to the doctor because it's getting too expensive. If we keep saying that's the problem, then people are going to be in more and more pain. The answer surely can't be
the hope is inflation gets under control.
You have to choose between food and rent.
Well,
that can't be the answer.
Well, that's obviously a dire situation for some people. The more common element is getting the cheaper food. But I'm just talking about your solution here. If you're putting more money in people's pockets from that, the money they have to spend on those items, that will be inflationary, won't it?
I don't think that people... Well, we're not talking about holidays, and we're talking about people who are skipping...
That's been a huge driver to inflation.
But so have rents, as the Reserve Bank governor has said, and Labor has no plan for dealing with the massive rent rise. And I think the governor said yesterday they're potentially looking at rental inflation of another 10% on top of the pain that people are experiencing at the moment. I mean, people are sleeping in cars.
Supply's a huge issue there on rental.
So let's build more public housing.
But
let's
we're talking
freeze
about
rents
today
and build more public housing.
Year or so. Nothing you can do really to help that very much.
You could freeze rents,
the supply aspect,
which would go to a huge difference. Well, no, there is something that can be done, and this is part of what we're pushing the government to do at the moment. At the moment, there's about 20-odd thousand affordable homes that are coming out of the system. They're the NRAS homes that are coming out of the system under this government. The government doesn't have a plan for any affordable homes that will be built until after the next election. We're about to enter this valley of death. Money now could be used by federal and state governments to buy up some of the vacant properties and the expiring NRAS properties and rent them out. So there are things that can be done on supply.
Housing the system.
Well, that could put people in affordable houses right now.
But those houses would have also been affordable for middle-income Australians that won't be there. So I'm just saying it doesn't increase the supply. It's not an extra house.
So let's build more public housing. And again, that's what we're pushing the government to do.
Can you, you're the only party pushing for the interventionist approach, if you like, on the RBA. Can you point to another example around the world where that's that's helped, where the Reserve Bank's been sidelined by the government of the day and it's been a good result?
Well, around the world, there's been freezing of rents, for example, intervening to freeze rents. It's even happened in Australia during the course of the pandemic. Well, we'd say the question is, should the government put its hand on the levers more? I don't think people think that the federal government has caused the cost of living crisis. They've been in power for a year. But I think people do want the government to do what it can to intervene to stop it. And we're saying this is the approach that needs to be taken. It would start with intervening to freeze rents. That's something the federal government could coordinate.
But you also want rates frozen. I mean, the recent example is Turkey. Inflation's running at 42%. Would you call that a good result?
Well, but again, this is why you need an across-the-board approach that says that one of the big drivers of inflation at the moment is not only rents that are going up in Australia, I mean, let's look at an Australian-specific approach, but also rising power bills. How do you deal with that? You freeze electricity bills at pre-crisis levels. You force the electricity companies to pay their fair share of tax because they're making a huge amount of profit at the moment, and you use it to fund an electricity bill freeze. But that is going to help everyday people, and it's also going to deal with one of the big drivers of inflation, which is profiteering.
An unprecedented economic experiment doing that, though? I don't think I can think of a place in the world where all those radical changes happen at once. It'd be an unknown, wouldn't it?
Tom, we've got people sleeping in their cars, but there are people in tents in parks in my electorate.
If we have hyperinflation, all of those things would get worse.
You've got people spending 60% of their income on rent. Forget home ownership for so many people. That's out of reach for so many people. But even renting near where you live, where you work, near where you study, where you work, where your family is, even those things are becoming out of reach. But it is the time. Okay. It is the time for the government to say, what tools does the government have?
Is it time for what would be an economic experiment, though?
It's time for what, at the moment...
It'd be a radical step. Would you agree with that?
But at the moment, Labor's approach, the RBA's approach, is to use everyday people as cannon fodder, say to the Reserve Bank, lift interest rates as high as you want. That will not only push the country towards recession, but it leaves everyday people...
But very briefly, I guess, do you agree that the worst outcome of all is embedded high inflation? That would be really bad for the economy. Do you agree with that?
I think anyone wants to see embedded high inflation, and we want to see wages, people's real wages starting to lift and incomes to match purchasing power. And what we're saying is that leaving everything to the Reserve Bank and leaving them with the only tool to lift interest rates is causing people enormous pain, and it's time to act.
Greens leader Adam Bandt, thanks for your time.
Thanks.